we identify funding to them who were engaged, who were allegedly engaged in illicit activities and funding the money back. And these financiers were engaged in illegal mining, galamsey. Ever wonder why it's so difficult, particularly in the oil city?
People who have given you T-shirts and money and all kinds of things, and now you are dealing with them. It was almost unconscionable, but it had to be done. And in the process, some of us almost lost our lives, because then the pressures within and without, because you are cutting off the source of funding for both parties. They will come after you. So we have created a system that legitimizes and institutionalizes the corruption, and at the same time we say we want to deal with the corruption. The solution is to deal with the system. When you deal with the system, then you no longer have this awkward situation where you go and collect money from the person. When you come into power, then you have to investigate the person or pretend to investigate the person, whichever way it is. So one party will talk about it. When they come, check all the corruption-related cases, from boss to whatever. Check. It's linked to campaign financing. There's always a financier there. Why, you think we are foolish people? Why is it that sometimes you ask yourself about which sensible person will sign this contract or will agree to this deal? Haven't you asked yourself that question? It's because our hands are tied.
That's Elvis Efriankra, Director of Elections at the NDC, being very forthright and getting hated for being as plain as he was on that occasion. My guest, Mary Awalana Ada, is Programs Manager, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Peter McMenu, former National Chairman of the NPP, a formidable elections person, observing elections and working on elections on the continent and the globe. We also have Siedu Nketia, who is the General Secretary of the NDC. Godfred Esiama is Research Analyst of the CDD. Gilfred Esiama is Research Analyst with the CDD. Thank you also very much. Let me start very briefly with Gilfred. What prompted this research, and what does the result exactly say? Hello, Mr. Esiama, please unmute.
Yes.
Yes, let's hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. We at CDD Ghana, as we call ourselves, we are partisans of democracy. So we are interested in key issues that confront our democracy. And as all of us know, political parties are fundamental to every democracy across the world. They carry the aspirations and wishes of the people. They mobilize people. They present options. And as at now, we haven't identified any alternative to political parties when it comes to the practice of multi-party elections. So in 2004, 2016, and the recent study that we have done, we have examined issues concerning political party financing in Ghana. And it is largely so because politicians and political parties need funds to execute the activities that they do, mobilizing, providing education, canvassing for vote. The one key thing about the financing of political parties is that if it's not regulated, if you don't take extra care, it undermines the essence of democracy for which political parties exist. If you don't take care, organized interest will influence the funding of political parties and candidates and capture the interest, the policies and the outcomes that when parties come into power, they implement. So that is one. Again, as we have learned over the years, political party funding is somewhat linked to corruption. So when people come to power, they have to give contracts. They have to pay back what people provided to them. And this is not just to mean that all political funding or campaign financing is riddled with corruption. There are some legitimate expenditure that politicians also have to deal with. And we have observed over the years the increasing cost of elections, right from 2016 study that we did, and some pronouncement by key political figures in our country expressing concern generally about the excessive monetization in our political environment.
So how do you come to the estimate that to have a successful presidential campaign, you need in excess of about 575 million Ghana cedis. That's $100 million. And if you want to be a parliamentary, if you want to go to parliament, you need to spend about 4 million Ghana cedis to be able to do that. How did you come about that?
Well, as we have indicated in our report, for the estimation for the presidential candidate, we didn't do a breakdown of the figure, but this figure has been mentioned and validated by politicians in the various engagement that we had with them in the course of the study, various validation sessions. And it's not surprising. We can even think about the activities that go into being contesting for political office as a president. For the parliamentary side, we have done research over the years, way back in 2016, know the cost, printing T-shirts, organizing rallies, and a lot. And even in the 2020, the study that we did, some candidates were spending 600,000 cedis just a short period before primaries and during the primaries. And some had to pay health insurance, 600 cedis per person. They had to pay rent for people. They had to pay school fees. If you are paying school fees, 2,300 cedis for about 50 university students, or because you want to nurture a constituency, you can estimate the amount of money that is involved. And we estimated that 2 million of the 4 million cedis goes into nurturing the constituency to succeeding at the primaries before you go back to contest for the main elections and post-election activities, Thanksgiving, organizing parties for party faithfuls and the sympathizers across. If you wouldn't mind, I wanted to give you just a recent example. Mr. Eugene Ahen, who has expressed interest in Ewutu Senya West. If you go back, just go back some few years ago, you can see the activities he's been doing, the kind of money he's putting into this. About 500 or so party delegates that he shared Peace of God with and donated some unspecified amount of money as captured in the media. He proceeded to Ewutu Bodease to meet a Muslim community. He made donations, and from there he went to former MP, a widow, made some donations. I have cited in the news, he's given a 3-unit classroom block, and this man, because he's interested in the office, when they are going for primaries, he should be interested in who becomes executive. So there too, he has to be interested, and some money has to go through. And you move from the executive to the delegate and all the cost that is involved. So when we talk about the cost, it is real, it is huge, printing of T-shirts and a lot of other things.
Right. Except that I think presently what Eugene Ahen is doing around his area there, I think it's about under a certain foundation for himself. So it will look like some charity work. We all know where it will end. But how do you come by the sources and is it just mere suspicion that some of the money is from illicit sources, including Galamsey? Did you go to the Electoral Commission to find out? Because according to law, these parties are required to file a report within 6 months from the 31st of December of each year, detailing the following. They are supposed to detail the state of their accounts, sources of funds, sources of the funds that they talk about, members' dues paid, contributions and donations, their assets, and audited accounts for the year. According to Section 30, subsection 3 of the Political Parties Act, if you contravene this law, it attracts a fine from any amount to a maximum of 10 million penalty units. That is 120 million Ghana cedis, or 2 years imprisonment, or both the fine and the imprisonment upon conviction. So you went to the EC and they gave you, and you realized that this is some of the sources of the funding?
Well, Samson, that's very interesting. The amount of money that goes through the political parties is quite insignificant when you talk about the total pool that one needs to mobilize for to fund their campaigns. And I'm sure the politicians are here, they will tell you membership contribution is so insignificant. We did some deck study and it ranked third. It was one of the least sources of funding for political candidates and even the party. And again, just to note that huge sums of money does not pass through the political party, and it goes through the individual candidates and people around the candidates. So they become the major source. They crowd this source of funding. So if you run through the political parties, they may present something to you, but I'm sure you will miss a lot out of it. So that is one. The second issue, and again, the law that you read required only political parties and not candidates, but the candidates are the ones who mobilize these resources. So that is one. Two, was it a mere allegation? No, it wasn't a mere allegation. We have stated the steps we used to arrive at these 9 people who are engaged in illicit funding. One, we identified informants in the 4 regions that we did a study. These people came out with a list of party financiers. From there, we sent researchers to the field to also generate lists using a snowball method to generate some lists. After that, we had to compare the 2 lists and identify people who appeared in both lists. When we finished, we also got party informants, 40 interviews, just to go through and understand these processes and the people that had been identified as major financiers. And when we talk about major financiers, we are talking about people who had donated about 100,000 cedis and over to the campaign of political candidates or political parties. So we went through all these mechanisms just to check the reliability and integrity of the information that we got. And again, from this pool of 53, which we did some analysis about, we followed up with 12 interviews with some of them, 12 people. And from this analysis 53, we got to understand that 9 people, where you have 7 directly engaged in illegal mining, that is Galamsey, as you all know. 1 person was involved in oil diversion. We did our checks to ascertain that 1 person was also involved in fraudulent business. And I can't mention names here, but if I were to mention names, I doubt if you would be surprised, knowing the kind of things you also know about politics.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. But hold on for us, just in case the politicians we are speaking to and party managers and candidate managers we are speaking to have a question or two for you. So let me take a first brief comment from Mary from the CDD. I said the CDD, the Ghana Integrity Initiative. What do you say? Reading and looking at the reports, what are your comments from where you sit?
Good morning, Samson. And let me say good morning to Gilfred and the other panelists. And good morning to your cherished viewers. It is not surprising. I'm saying so because the Ghana Integrity Initiative with CDD and the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition have done some work in the past on electoral corruption. and generally abuse of incumbency, and we've done it over the years during our elections. We also have an appreciation of the fact that the politicians or people who want to be elected into political office take advantage of the several gaps in our law to ensure that they do things for their benefit. Again, our studies over the past have indicated that the demand side of corruption is increasingly becoming prominent and proactive. Citizens are asking for their due because they know that the national cake will not be distributed as they wish. They would not get their development projects when these politicians come into power. And so they begin to demand them in the TVs and in the motorcycles, the bicycles, and other things that they distribute. And so corruption has become an unfortunately great part of our electoral process. And now CDD has added on the fact that some of the financiers who are brought to bear, or who most of our politicians engage to solicit funds from, also engage in illicit activities. That is unfortunate, but that is the reality with which we live as a people. And we believe that we need to begin to interrogate some of these processes and ask, do the political parties do any due diligence when it comes to the money they are receiving from the funders or the donors who give them money? Because we cannot just go out there and say, I am taking money from this person and I do not know anything they do. I am very sure that in other dispensations, this would not be accepted, and people who accept such monies would be called to accountability. Unfortunately, our accountability processes are not as effective as they should be. And so we see the supply side of corruption seriously engage in the act. And per the reports that I read, you realize they give some very flimsy excuses as to they want to remain friends with both and so that their businesses are not affected. Some say they want to remain in business. Others will tell you they want to continue to make profit. And others clearly indicate that if they do not do it, they would be vilified. And that is very informative. And our political parties and the very prominent persons who are leading these processes should bow their heads in shame, because we are saying that we are throwing competition to the dogs. We are saying that we are making our procurement processes so very not competitive and allowing people who are the highest bidders to gain from what they are putting into their campaigns. And this has been justified by the video you played, and the person clearly saying that, what do you expect? If the person helps you, then it means hand go, hand come. And so we should justify such processes. Unfortunately, some of us cannot and will not understand, and we cannot comprehend how in a system where we are talking of fairness and equity, we are agreeing and accepting that as a society, we are putting aside the rules and allowing corruption to pervade.
All right. Let me go to Peter McMenu now. Thank you very much for making the time to join us, sir. First, I'd like to check with you. Do you think that Elvis Afriankra, when he spoke about this a couple of years ago, was being forthright or he was not? And a portion of what he said that check all the corruption-related cases from the boss to whatever. Check it is linked to campaign financing. There is always a financier there. Why? You think we are foolish people? Why is it that sometimes you ask yourself that which sensible person will sign this contract or will agree to this deal? Have you asked yourself that question? It is because our hands are tied. You agree with him?
Samson, good morning, and good morning to your esteemed viewers. I think that campaigning involves monetary expenditure as part of it. Political parties in Ghana are constrained by a lot of actions and inactions, legal, institutional, and others that sort of tied us when it is time for campaigning on how to raise funds legitimately. So raising the funds itself is one thing, and the source of the funding, which is questionable most of the time, because if you are asking for funding, you are not going to probe where the person is going to. You will send either a letter, a telephone, whisper a message about an activity, a campaign activity that you are going to perform in a region, a constituency, or an advertisement in a media house that you are supposed to carry. So if you need these kind of expenditures, you are not going to go beyond where the person is going to get the money from. But from your own estimation, he is somebody who has interest in your party. He is a party member or a party loyalist. And from what you perceive, he has that extra income to donate to the party. So I think that CDD has done a good job. We need to look at the existing laws in the Political Parties Act at 574 and look at how we can reform it such that when the sources of funds are shown, Ghanaians can have access to know that ABC contributed this kind of money to Party A or Party B. So the nature of reforms that we should take, and I agree with many of the reforms suggested by the CDD booklet on short, medium, and long term. We should be looking at institutions like Electoral Commission, like financial statement reading, that is bringing in professionals like the audit service to help the Electoral Commission, and education, getting the political parties themselves to also accept that what we are doing is not the best for our nascent democracy. So I agree with Elvis. We have come a long way since 1992 and even before 92, but the cost seems to be rising. And when the costs are rising, you will look for avenues of filling in the gaps in the cost. Now, there are so many media houses you want to attract to beef up your campaign. Now, there are a lot of one-on-one campaign, and that costs more money. Now, the voters would like to be sensitized digitally, and it costs money to do that. So, political campaign expenditures itself are going up. But there is a caveat. Something I think I'd like to add is CDD itself in 2020 did a survey, and one of the outcomes of that survey is that respondents said they will take your money, but they will not necessarily vote for you. So we should not take the Ghanaian voters for granted that because you go and look for money and give it to them, they are going to vote for you. No.
All right.
And some, you are aware that we live in a country where, particularly in our own internal elections, some people haven't lost, have tried to chase delegates for their monies or their TV sets or whatever.
That's right.
So it does not necessarily translate to election victory, and we must be very much aware.
Interesting. Interesting. Johnson Asiedun Ketia of the NDC, General Secretary, joins us. Thank you very much. And just as Peter McMenu said, you also said that it is only perhaps later, after you have been successful, that you get to know the background and the source of the money that you may have received. How so?
Very much, Samson. Let me say a very big good morning to listeners. And let me also begin with a disclaimer, and that I'm speaking to you. It is true I'm the General Secretary of the National Democratic Congress, but I'm speaking to you as someone. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Someone that, yeah, I'm speaking to you as someone that has researched the subject of corruption in Ghana for my master's degree.
Okay.
And so, not all the views I express here necessarily as Secretary of the National Democratic Congress.
Okay, please pardon me. Pardon me. Let's do this. We want to rather call you on the phone. Your internet is not the best, so we want to rather call you on the phone so that we can have a better connection to you. That's Johnson Asiedun Ketia. He says he prefers to speak in his private and personal capacity rather than the corporate person that he is as the General Secretary of the NDC, and again also because he did his master's degree doing a project on corruption within in party financing. So we will get his views shortly about that. I want you to also remember, I may read a portion of the sole commissioner of judgment debts, Justice Yao Apao. A part of his report, President Mills commissioned him to look at judgment debts, inordinate judgment debts, and why this country was plunged into paying millions of dollars in judgment debt. And when he finished his work, part of the recommendation was to think critically and seriously about political party funding, because it's obvious to many of us that contributes largely to the unconscionable judgment debts that we see. So people literally deliberately just fleece the country in the name of judgment debts so that they can build a war chest to conduct an election. Interesting. Is Johnson Asiedun Ketia back on the line? Okay. We're trying to reestablish contact with him on phone because his line was not the best. Let's hear him. He has spoken to us earlier. He spoke to us earlier. So let's hear Johnson Asiedun Ketia's initial response when the survey was announced.
I don't know whether I'll be able to actually say with some certainty, because nobody comes to offer funding and tells you that I'm engaging. And usually that is what they will be doing. It is only when you come to power that somebody will come and say that, well, this person, this business, help us with it and so on. So nobody will come and disclose that I kill human beings, so I'm a terrorist, so I'm coming to finance your party. Nobody will accept that type of.
Right. So please, let's hear you continue with your submission.
Yes. And from the research that I did, it became clear that there is some illicit funding of political parties or political party candidates. And it also emerged that those who want to fund political parties from illicit business will not disclose to the political party their source of funding, or the candidate the source of funding. Indeed, if you are a candidate and you are in financial distress and you have somebody coming up saying that, well, I believe in your vision, so I want to fund you this much, without telling you where his source of income is coming from, it is most unlikely for that distressed candidate to be asking you where your monies are coming from. But when you win and the demands begin emerging from your financier, that is where you realize that the type of business is engaged in. And so we should not hide our heads in the sand like the proverbial ostrich and say that all is well with our political funding. Our democracy is daily getting endangered because of source of funding. And I associate myself with what Elvis has said earlier on, that political funding is a major root cause of corruption. And the earlier we exposed and confronted it and dealt with it, the better it will be for our democracy.
From where you sit, is it worse now than before? Because many people think that when you were campaigning to go to Parliament and you went to Parliament, during those days, the times that Hackman, Owusu Ajima and Dems, your group and before, the system was not as monetized as it is now. What do you say to that?
That is true. For every passing election, the system becomes more monetized. That is why I am scared that unless we as a country find a way of pulling the brakes, our democracy will be heading towards doom. For every passing election, monetization becomes worse. And things that were unheard of in previous elections gradually become the norm. Because in the 92s, thereabouts, you wouldn't hear about campaign of delegates. In fact, when it gets to internal party elections, you wouldn't hear about campaign of delegates and giving monies and so on. We've now far gotten past that one, and it appears that campaign of delegates and giving them envelopes has become a norm, and people are openly discussing these things on air to the extent that those who give envelopes and they end up not being voted for come openly to demand back their money. I think that we are getting, the situation is getting out of hand.
Right.
And something must be done about it. If we want to do something about it, we must first define what is allowed as legitimate activity for the soliciting of votes. I agree with Peter that it costs money to campaign. But not all that cost is coming from just the cost of living in the country. We are adding things and making them a normal part of campaigning, which should not be part of campaigning. If you are going to campaign and previously you were not buying bicycles, previously you were not buying motorbikes and cars and so on. And gradually you see that people started buying and distributing bicycles, which was not complained about. It upgraded into motorbicycles, and now it is cars that are being promised. Since when did this become part of our campaign? We should find a way of
Thank you. Thank you. Hold on briefly for me. Let me quickly get Peter McMahon to see if I can get a confirmation for this. And I remember when Peter McMahon, you were campaigning to lead your party. You had to go all over the country. Today, do you think that it has become worse as people are even going around for party positions? And the things we see they do, the monies they offer, and we get to hear about.
It's not the best. It's not good for our democracy. I believe that we should find ways, and that's why I commend CDD for this project. We should find ways of curtailing the escalating cost and monetization of our elections, both internal and general elections. So people are spending money, and ultimately, when power comes to them, they have to pay back. I know some MPs who are still indebted to their financiers one way or the other. So if they don't find contracts or corrupt means to pay them back, they're not going to be steady working in Parliament House. They will be sitting in Parliament House, but their mindsets will be tuned elsewhere. So we must find a way of reducing the cost of elections in this country. That's the first thing.
Yeah, you had mentioned finding a way earlier, and you mentioned even the electoral laws, what to do about them. I said also, resource to the same things, what we need to do. But what exactly are you saying can be done? At the level of the parties, you decided to expand your electoral college base for internal elections. And that was supposed to be part of the process of removing money. But has that done the magic yet?
It will do the magic because we haven't reached there yet. NDC made an attempt by bringing on board every card-bearing member. But you see, you need the right infrastructure to be able to achieve that in a better managed way. So we started with the polling station executives 55555. There are concerns that we should increase it to every card-bearing member, which is something NDC did and it failed. But to do that, you need certain amount of infrastructure on party membership, how updated they are, payment of their dues, where are they located, can there be any unique identity to identify them? So we are in the mood of doing all this. And it won't be long. Our membership base will be technologically linked and we'll be able to identify. Then we will say we have the infrastructure to carry on this kind of assignment where every card-bearing member will be brought on board. And when that is done, it will be difficult for people to pay monies to that size of
what's your specific recommendation as to legislative approach to reducing this situation, particularly when it comes to funding campaigns?
I think one, the length of our campaign periods must be shortened, and it must be decisive that 2 months, 3 months should be the campaign period. Because in our country, Ghana, we don't have any laws on campaign periods, and people campaign throughout the years, etc. But in other African countries, you go to Kenya, Nigeria, it's 3 months, 2 months. So we must change the law, either the constitutional instrument or any act of parliament, to define the time frame for the elections. And I'm happy that some time back, Ghana Bar Association made this suggestion that campaign period should be limited to a certain amount of time so that when elections are over, at least people can have their peace of mind and the expenditures will be limited to that kind of period. Then there should also be a reform or a law on the filing of political parties' end of year or post-election expenditure and revenue accounts. They should widen it and make it more public, more transparent, and name people who contributed to a candidate and a party. It should not be limited to a party alone. It should be both a candidate and a party, so that at the end of the day, we'll be able to know where the monies came from and what they were used for. It's important that we are able to do this to bring some more transparency into the conduct of our elections and campaign finance.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sedunketia, you have said that there's a need to retweak the law. So what are your specific interventions you are looking at? Do you agree with Peter McMahon when he begins with the reform of the filing of the political party accounts to include candidates? Because presently, what you file is only for the parties. And the Electoral Commission, I doubt, does anything beyond what you decide to declare.
Thank you very much. I agree with Peter on many of the things he has suggested, but I want to go further. We need, for instance, we need to compel the candidate to also disclose. Because the irony of this rising political funding cost vis-a-vis the requirement for political parties to disclose, the amount of money spent, is that the bulk of the funding is done directly by the candidate to whom they choose, without passing the funding through the structures or the accounts of the political party. So sitting at headquarters in Accra, I'm not in a position to know how much the NDC candidate in Kwasimintin, for instance, is spending in his campaign and what he's spending the money on. Much the same way when it comes to presidential campaigns, it is the same. No presidential candidate channels his campaign funding through the political party. So at the end of the year, the parties are able to disclose what amount of money pass through their accounts, and they cover dues and contributions and donations that are done to the party as a party. But mind you, if any big donor wants to contribute to the party, he wants to do it through the person who becomes the president or the MP, because he is the individual whom he will be relying on for subsequent favors and so on. So if the laws about disclosure is just compelling political parties to file accounts, then a lot of the funding will go undisclosed. So that is why Peter is making that suggestion. But I want to add that even with the political party, the regulation is not done very well. But the Constitution mandates the Electoral Commission to organize elections, register people, and so on. There is nowhere in the Constitution where the duty of regulating political parties is imposed on the Electoral Commission. And that is why we have suggested that before you can have the activity of regulating political parties properly in place, it should not play second fiddle to the conduct of elections. We must have an office, the regulator of political parties, that will follow up on their accounts. Even make sure that the disclosures that are made in the final account actually represent reality. And they can check the source of funding and all others. That is why we have made that,
Briefly, can you tell us how far, what progress has been made on that particular recommendation for reform that you made to the Electoral Commission? We have heard significant persons in the NPP support that, and also democracy watchers also support that the EC needs to be decoupled. Its functions need to be decoupled so that it doesn't take this function on as well. Because already, as the history will show, it has failed terribly in that regard.
Unfortunately, the progress so far is zero. The Electoral Commission has not taken any step. The Attorney General has not proposed any new legislation in that regard, and nothing is happening, unfortunately. Nothing is happening. But the other suggestion I would want to strongly canvass.
Yes, finally.
Canvassing for all these years is some state funding of the activities of political parties. You know, when you ask yourself, how come that when a party is in government, then donations flow freely from left, right, center, and the party is able to do many things? And immediately the party goes out of power, those donations are then diverted to parties that are in power. It tells you that the donors benefit something from a party which forms a government. And so we cannot close our eyes to this.
All right.
Let us open it up. The state will fund one political party or the other through the back door anyway. So why can't we open up and accept the type of funding of a political party that the state can accommodate? For instance, something that comes in easily is the state taking up the cost of internal elections of a political party. The reason why we could not pursue this our universal membership suffrage for our internal elections, which we believe would be a panacea to cure corruption within the internal party elections, was that the membership suffrage, full membership suffrage, comes along with cost, because you are calling on the party members to cast their votes where they will be casting their votes regularly in a general election. The implication is that you are deploying the staff of Electoral Commission across the country as if you are engaged in a general election. And then, unfortunately, the state picks up the bill when it is general election. But when it is an internal party election and you are deployed across the country so as to limit corruption, the Electoral Commission will call on the political party to bear the cost. So the exercise we did prior to the 2016 election was so costly. The amount we ended up paying to the Electoral Commission for the staff deployed cannot be borne by a small political party.
All right.
So if there is an arrangement where the Electoral Commission will be deployed to facilitate the holding of internal party elections based on universal membership suffrage, then we can all move into that direction.
All right.
And it will let the possibility of people buying delegates and so on.
Thank you.
Perhaps we'll find some time and go into
Thank you. More. Thank you very much, Johnson Esiedun Ketia. And let me get just 1 minute final comment from Peter McMahon on the state funding issue also, because you all talk about it only when you are in opposition. We know, for example, when the NPP was in opposition for quite a long time, how it was difficult for you to even organize your congresses, and you had to be begging your members to finance it. Sometimes it wasn't working. I think there was one occasion it took your presidential candidate, to look for the money. Otherwise, you couldn't have had a Congress.
Yes, thank you, Samson. I think Johnson knows that we have come together with all the political parties under the banner of the Ghana Political Parties Program, GPP, to recommend to the Electoral Commission under Dr. Kojo Afarijan that they should consider some form of legislation that will get the state to fund political parties. We have done that very long ago. It's in the shelves of the Electoral Commission. And I quite remember that when under the Ghana Political Parties Program, the NDC under the late Dr. Kwabena Eji and myself were on the same platform called the Chairman's Caucus. We made the same suggestions. So it is not new, but we should be bringing it to the front burner so that more action is taken on it. So I favor funding of political parties.
All right.
After all, currently, the fees that the Electoral Commission takes, they pay back to parties that get a certain level of votes. I think it's 25% for parliamentary and 12.5% for presidential. So there should be a methodology where people cannot just walk in and take the money because it's a political party.
All right.
But the method of getting the money, the EC and state organizations like the Auditor General, etc., can come in and ensure that you work as a party. We are able to ascertain the cost of the work you did before the nation can fund that expenditure.
All right. Thank you very much, Peter McMahon. Let's get just a minute each from the CDD and also from the GII. So, Mr. Asiama, what will you say, having listened to these two big political parties that are responsible for all the rot as far as the issue of the corruption in the through political party funding is concerned? Having listened to them, what do you have to say? Please unmute your mic.
We are having a very honest conversations, and as you can see from both sides, they agree on the issues. We are thinking about the way forward, which we have proposed, and they have embraced it. We are constituting a multi-stakeholder working group to look at some of these proposals and draw a roadmap on how we should finance political parties in this country. Issues about public funding is okay, but it's about what should we fund, when and how. And I think all those issues will be considered. And again, the last one is that I think we need to also state clearly, explicitly, that illicit funding is not allowed. This is to give additional responsibility to candidates to double check the funding that they receive, and also make it more risky for the people who are engaged in these illicit activities who tend to finance political parties. So we are going ahead with these proposals, and we hope that we will come out with something very important for reforms.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, Mary. In a minute, CDD, you just had a meeting this week to re-strategize on how to, improve the corruption fight, because people are getting fatigued, because as we know, it's becoming rationalized. There's a normalization of corruption in the country.
Exactly, and so that is why for me, let me also say it's heartwarming to hear the politicians all agree for the first time for me on this particular matter, that they are all complicit when it comes to political party financing and how they raise their resources. And they appreciate as well that some of the sources of the funding is actually not clean. What I would say to conclude, and for a fact that people are really getting tired of us speaking and of the political rhetoric, which has also been manifested here today. People accepting, but they're not doing much to change the situation. For me, I believe that for any impact we make going forward, we need to change this situation. And the fact remains that charity only begins at home. If the political parties begin to disqualify candidates who go out there publicly trying to influence the process, who go out there soliciting illegal funds, then people would be, in a way, let's say, dissuaded from pursuing such paths in the future.
All right.
But until then, the citizen who sees that the only way for his pocket to be better is that during elections, he would get some goodies from the people who come to him, because he will not get any social development in his community.
Thank you.
They would continue to do so.
Thank you very much, Mary Awalana Ada is Programs Manager, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Interesting, though, that you want the parties to begin to take these actions when at the top they are actually involved. They say they don't examine your source of funding, but they know, we know. For example, the people that CDD has identified as those who are engaged in illicit acts. Why? Don't we know in this country what these people are involved in? It's no secret. Peter McMahon is former national chairman of the NPP. Johnson Esiedun Ketia is General Secretary of the NDC. Gilfred Esiama is research analyst with the CDD. Can we have the Electoral Commission at least crack the whip just for a little while on what the law requires, and let's see what we get before we look at all these things that are being proposed? We'll be right back on E-Levy.